to sign it, not including me. And if you have a substitute, remember that your substitutes don't know this, but they do have the option of signing the paper. They'll just need to write a note to the teacher that says, hey, I signed off your kid to leave on Monday. If that's not okay, tell Jose. You should realize that this is just political between myself and the other teachers to make sure that everything is cool. It doesn't affect your attendance. I don't care if you prefer to ditch, that's fine. But I still won't take you on the field trip because I got to do what's cool with all my colleagues, and some of them cannot approve you being absent that day. So remember that the field trip packet is due tomorrow. Also, tomorrow's the last day to sign up for your wanted species. And in this period, Harrison, are you sure the copperhead snake is invasive in California?
I looked it up and said it was. I looked it up on like your UC Berkeley, like this Californian things or invasive species.
Cool, man. If it's on there, we should go with it. But that surprises me a great deal. They live in tropical swamps. I don't know how many of those. It's a Keystrodon. It's from the American Southeast. They're cottonmouth snakes. Or they're related to the cottonmouth. And I've just never heard of them in Cali, but if it's in there, it's all good, man. I love to learn new stuff. That's right. Thanks. Okay. Colin. Levi. We've got a lot of land to cover today.
That's fun. Can you plant mine for yesterday also? I listened to you for yesterday. Oh wait, I remember. It didn't even start up. On that one, by each day, and then they didn't forward it.
Let's go on with the biome slideshow unless there are other questions. Is it true that yesterday we were talking about chaparral? Did we get this far?
Oh yeah.
We did? And what did we discuss here? Did we talk about the weather in Santa Barbara?
Yes.
Did we talk about the rainfall?
Yeah.
A few major storms? How does this affect soil quality? We have no soil. The plants can't afford to waste any organic material. There's no rainfall to help support decomposition. Imagine a worm trying to live in most parts of our hills. It would just dry out and turn into a dry worm. So we don't really have a lot of soil ecology in this part of the world. Ecologically speaking, this part of the world is very, very simple. And so our soil has almost no nutrient fluxes, has very little decomposition, very little topsoil. We talked about how our trees are all little midgets, right? Little chaporros, little itty bitty runs. Remember that our plants, if they grow up like this to get the sunlight, they're also open to be tickled by the wind, and that will take away their water. Remember that if they grow like this to get sunlight, it doesn't make a lot of sense because our sun is pretty directly overhead here. But again, if they grow really tall, that's going to expose them to the wind. That will take away their water. Plants around here, when they take a drink in March, That might be their last drink until November. So our plants have a really special adaptation. They don't grow like this. They don't grow like that. Our plants grow like this. So they can cover their roots and trap their little pocket of moisture. This is why it's called chaparral, because the forest is little midget dwarf runt forest. Is it chaparro or chaporro? Chaparro. Anybody know chaparro? It means like a short person or like a little kid or something. Chaparral is like little runt forest. It means like little scrawny, wimpy dwarf forest. It's like a little grom forest. You'll notice how dusty the forest is. We talked about that yesterday. Our plants are often covered with wax that helps them retain their very little supplies of water. And it never rains here, but it is often windy here. So we kick up that dusty soil and the waxy plant surfaces pick it up. And with no rain to wash them off, we actually have the dustiest vegetation on Earth. Thought you'd like to know that. So from far away, you can often see that like grayish tint that we get. That's because, frankly, it's just dust and wax. Waxy, dusty, waxy, dusty. Now, in many parts of the world, you know it's spring because it started raining. And in many parts of the world, because it started raining, all the decomposition from winter soaks into the ground, and then all the seeds will sprout and party and make their flowers and do their thing. But around here, a lot of our plants just can't grow in the spring. There's just not enough action. There's not enough soil. There's not enough nutrient cycling. With no topsoil, spring is not that much better than the rest of the year. However, in our part of the world, we do have another force that keeps nutrient cycling, and that's fire. You see, we are a very dry part of the world, but in the summer, every now and then, we do get these little thunderstorms. How many of you remember a lightning storm during summer in Santa Barbara? I believe there were a couple last summer when I was out of town. I know there was a couple the summer before that. And I think 3 or 4 summers ago, we had a lot of lightning strikes in Santa Barbara. Now, you've been biased. Our bad habits have miseducated you. We've been putting out fires in this part of the world for about 100 years now. Which is kind of stupid because our plants don't need fire protection. They don't need like an umbrella when it rains. They don't need sunblock. They're evolved for the sun. They're evolved for the rain. And go figure, they're evolved for the fire too. Because we don't have a lot of soil, we have many plant species where sprouting in crappy sand with little rain doesn't make a lot of sense. The seeds will stay in the ground. And the seeds are often coated with wax to trap their water, but when it gets hot, the wax literally melts off the seed. And then the seed can start soaking up water and sprout. That way, the seeds only sprout after an extremely hot, when it's wet, after something extremely hot, like a fire, and that's good for the seed because fire composts. It returns a lot of organic material back to the soil. See, we got no topsoil. If you're walking on one of these trails and you got to bury your poop, good luck getting 6 inches down. There's really not a lot of dirt here. Seeds sprouting in our dirt, kind of a dodgy proposition. A lot of them, they just wait. Because fire is a natural part of our environment, and those ashes are going to have a lot of nutrients left in them. Then a lot of our seeds will only sprout after a fire. This is called a fire renewal community. Instead of cycling nutrients through the soil food web and decomposition, this is one of the many places where the nutrients are cycled by fire and ash. Yeah.
Is that why they do controlled burns?
Well, it is a benefit of controlled burns, sure. But the main reason that we're doing controlled burns nationally, like throughout the country now, is to limit the spread of fires. Imagine, for gazillions and gazillions and gazillions of years, we've had fires not stopped by humans. So if a fire strikes here, it'll spread until it hits the bald spot where it just burned last year, and the green area that's all lush that burned 3 years ago. It's called patchiness, so that next year, when this area catches on fire, it will be stopped by that scar and this scar. The natural state of our wilderness is to be called patchy, where you had a fire 1 year ago, a fire 3 years ago, a fire 10 years ago, a fire 40 years ago, that'll burn. But that won't get too far because all the other patches are pretty fresh. You're with me? So in our part of the world, because we've been putting out fires for so long, nothing has burned in like 100 years. And now when there's a fire, it's unnatural. It's like you'd say it's a man-made fire because we've like added gasoline, so to speak, metaphorically. Now the fires get too hot and they destroy everything. With that much heat, those seeds actually catch on fire instead of just getting the cue to sprout.
The fires don't help it.
Unless we make it patchy again through controlled burns. It's to limit the spread of natural fires so you can basically let them go. Jessica?
Why are the fires gotten too hot?
Because we've let too much fuel pile up. If we had left the fire renewal community alone, we would have had 1,000 little fires in the last 100 years. They would have all been little, but they create those patches, which are like borders on the next burnable land.
So are plants not growing as well because of
Right. A lot of fire renewal species are now either absent or more rare. A lot of this stuff only sprouts right after a fire. We haven't had a fire in many parts for it. The canyon below my dome hasn't had a fire for 120 years. When that canyon goes, it's going to be nar-nar. Yeah.
Oh, I was just wondering, like, so like in the natural world before like humans started building stuff, the only way fire would start was just through lightning, right? There's no other way for a tree to ignite, right?
In very rare cases, like a rock fall that creates a spark that lands in the. But yeah, like,
Yeah. Okay. So us putting out the fires to protect our like civilization and stuff is like why we have like too much fuel.
kind of, and you know, I should say that you'd be an idiot not to put out a fire that threatens your house or your life.
Yeah.
I've never heard anyone argue that we shouldn't protect human property and human life. But we've been putting out fires in the wilderness. Like, oh my God, I love the forest, don't let the fire hurt it.
Okay.
And we forgot that fire is probably like rain. You know, we don't run out there and put an umbrella over the trees.
Right.
We're like, I love the forest and let it get wet. We should have said, I love the forest and let it burn too. Because it has burned. It is a natural process in our
So
forest.
like environmentalists that are doing like the wrong environmental thing.
Absolutely. And one of the most famous environmentalists suggested this. Aldo Leopold, the guy who wrote the Sand County Almanac, which was considered to be like the first book about white Europeans having a romantic attachment to conservation of nature. A guy who said this is important for our national American spirit, and said we need to conserve land because it's good for us and it's restorative and wilderness is nice.
Mm-hmm.
He said we should put out wildfires. It kills the forest that we need.
Right.
And he's credited as being one of the most important thinkers on the environment. And philosophically, he's a big deal, but he just got that fact wrong. We've been on that track for, in some places, 150 years. And so we've like prevented fires, and now there's just too much fuel. It's funny, like a natural fire is usually small, not that hot, and really helpful. But by preventing those, we now get unnatural. You know the Yosemite fire, the rim fire? The one that just burned into Yosemite at the end of summer? You guys remember that one, the big one? Yeah. That fire reached temperatures so high that the nutrients in the soil turn to gas form, and the dirt is sterilized.
Meaning it can't be like used for growth.
It's like you just replaced it with silica sand.
Wow.
The fire got so hot that the dirt is no longer dirt.
Is that our fault?
Yeah, because we had an extended history of fire prevention in that area. I mean, the fire was coincidentally started by a human too. It's probably a hunter, which isn't going to help with hunting politics in California.
Better than trying to hunt in Europe.
Oh, yeah, I mean, always could be worse. There's another thing that's really memorable about our part of the world. We've been talking a lot about trivia and species you should know. You should know that one. That's a golden eagle. On Santa Cruz Island, after the DDT killed off the bald eagles, you guys remember talking about that with the mushy eggs, ritual silent, and framed it? After all the bald eagles left, the golden eagles moved in. And for a while, people were like, hooray, the eagles are back! The big difference is that golden eagles eat mammals. Bald eagles eat fish. When the bald eagles left, nothing left to eat the fish, not a big deal. But when the golden eagles showed up, they started eating the mammals. And Santa Cruz Island has an extremely rare mammal that occurs nowhere else on the planet but that island, the island fox. They're so cute.
They're everywhere, though. They're not endangered at all. They're like everywhere.
Well, their numbers were in very steep decline. The good news is they've had a really good last 10 or 15 years. So by now they're kind of coming back. Right around the time you were born, it was a really scary moment. These guys were like probably a dozen mating pairs on the islands, and they were just picking them off, 2 or 3 a day. Pretty gnarly.
When you go to the campsite, there's like squirrels.
They love the campsite. And by the way, wherever you set up your tent, they will either poo on it or pee on it. Because they mark territory. So they smell something new in their environment, and they're like, that's mine. And they'll walk over and pee on it. So I woke up one night to go pee near the UC field station. And I walk outside to pee on a tree, and I look over, and there's a little fox peeing on my tent. And I was like, bro, let's bond. Like, let's go to the bathroom together. All right. Yeah.
Is that like the full size of the eagle?
Those are actually both immature. These are not adults. These are like adolescent age. Okay. You should take pride. You live in one of the rarest biomes on the planet. By square mileage, this is the rarest intact biome. Meaning if you can find intact chaparral, there are less miles of intact chaparral than anything else. It's a pretty small biome to begin with. Hit it, Patrick. There were very few square miles to begin with. And then we've dominated a bunch of it and ranched a bunch of it and logged a bunch of it. So we didn't have a lot to begin with, and we certainly don't have very much left now. If you get a chance to enjoy our wilderness, you really should. Okay. Temperate grassland. Oh, now that we're getting to this, please look up. Which of these has the most soil nutrients and which of these has the least? Most is...
Grassland.
Least is...
Desert.
No.
Savannah?
No.
Rainforest.
Oh, right. No nutrients, no water.
I don't know.
So grassland is the orange stuff.
That's a little bit.
Yeah, I know. They could have made it green, right? When you look at that orange stuff, you might realize those are the food production parts of the world because this is the best dirt there is. I come from the South American orange block. I was born right in the middle of the South American orange there. Yeah, here's your hand.
Why is it better than the rainforest?
I'll get to that. I'll explain both why this is good and why that is bad. I was born right there. That's where I'm from. I'm from like the South. I'm from Argentina's Kansas. Like I'm a Midwesterner in my country. Well, a lot of the same things, like we talked about how the Midwest has like a slow, rural culture. Like that's I guess where I'm from, or where I was born. I moved around a lot in Argentina. We were on the run when I was born, so I don't have any memories of it. And you all know what grassland is. It's grassy. Now, remember that in the temperate zones, we do have some seasonality. There are definitely seasons. And one thing that's really cool is that it rains during every season. Summer is hot and winter is cold, but it rains in summer and it rains in winter. Grasses are perfectly adapted to this. You know, each season is distinctly different. Spring is different from fall, is different from summer, is different from winter. Clean, discrete, separate seasons. And because the conditions are different, you get like a summer grass species. But that species has to go from seed to seed in about 3 months. Because then when the fall comes around, that's going to be really different weather. So you have all these species that are adapted for each season. There are the spring species, followed by the summer species, followed by the fall species, followed by the winter species. And within each season, there's even more specialization. You get the dry spring species. Next year, spring might be wet, so there are wet-adapted spring species. Tons of grass diversity. The part that you really got to know, though, is that because each of those seasons is distinct, the grasses will grow and die in that 3-month period. And then the next 3 months, we'll have another round of grass growing and dying, and another round of grass growing and dying, and another round of grass growing and dying. Which creates the best soils on the planet, because grass is really good at growing fast. It fixes nutrients from water and from the air very quickly. And then when it dies, that just becomes compost. As soon as the grass falls, there's already grass sprouting through it for the next season. And when that stuff falls, there will be grass sprouting through it for the next season. If you go to the grassland, you kick the dirt, and the top inch or so is like the mesh on the bottom of carpet. You guys ever seen the bottom of carpet? It has that like thin fiber mesh that's like woven. You can tear it, but it's like pretty dense. That's what the grasses are like. Because when they fall, they'll be braided with another set, and then that'll fall. And then another one will come up through both of those, and then that'll fall. So you get this like mat, like a carpet, that encourages soil ecology and really robust decomposition. With all of that rapid growth and fixation, you're adding nutrients to the soil every 3 months, and the soil keeps getting deeper and deeper. These are some of the deepest soils on Earth. Imagine, 3 months later, it's a different type of grass, and 3 months later, it's a different type of grass, and 3 months later, it's a different type, and a different type, and a different type, and a different type. There was a story, I read a book about a family that was sort of like a Little House on the Prairie style. And they came from Pennsylvania. They were Quakers. And in Pennsylvania, the dirt is really rocky. Did you guys know that? Like, farming in Pennsylvania is really challenging because you got to scrape all the rock off. And then you get a little bit of dirt. But you can't push your shovel into the dirt because there's so many rocks in the way. So in Pennsylvania, unless your family has worked the dirt for hundreds of years, it'll have rocks in it everywhere. This family from Pennsylvania came out to the middle somewhere, and they like see their big patch of farmland. They put up the 4 stakes to mark the corners. They stake their claim. They're like, okay, this is going to be our homestead. And Ma is getting ready to unpack the wagon and says, hey, Pa, why don't you go start digging the outhouse? And Pa says, sure, Ma, and he grabs a shovel and he walks out. He says, yeah, I guess this is a good spot, and he starts digging. And that night at dinner, Ma and the kids can't find Pa, and they're like, oh yeah, maybe he's over at the outhouse still. And they walk over, and the dude had dug himself like I don't know, 10, 20 feet into the ground with just a shovel. And he's like, oh my God, this is amazing! Look at this dirt! And this is beautiful, rich, black dirt for feet. People sell this dirt. Like farmers in other parts of the planet, they order like trains full of this dirt. Yeah.
That's might be kind of a weird question, but like, what is like? I never understood like what is soil? Like, what is dirt? Like, is it more close to like a formed rock, or is it more close to like biotic? Like, what is soil?
Well, soil is technically the mix of both. Sand is small pieces of rock, and that's all it is. When stuff grows in sand and dies in sand, it adds organic material. That's on its way to disappearing. So soil is sand plus stuff that hasn't decomposed all the way yet.
So does that mean that like soil is like a resource that you overuse, or is
Yeah.
it frequently made?
Globally, we've lost somewhere between 10 and 30% of our topsoil volume. There's less dirt now than there was in Columbus time. It can be used up. You put a potted plant in a pot, it'll do great for a little while, and after a year or two, it'll just like top out because that dirt gets used up, finishes the decomposition. Now, about trivia in this environment, we've already talked about these little guys, so we can skip them. And I'm going to skip this guy, but look at how cute he is with his weird little ears. It's an unusual hair.
How big is it?
I don't know. But the one I want to talk about is this species, because this is really famous and really interesting. Anybody know what that is? Bison. Just so you know, buffalo is a generic term. It's like saying deer. There's a lot of different kinds of deer. There's a lot of different kinds of buffalo. There's buffalo all over the world, like the buffalo that live in the Arctic Circle near northern Canada, like the water buffalo in the savannas of Africa. And the American buffalo is also known as bison. That's our species of buffalo. That's it. There was a time when these were extremely common on the American grasslands, but they're almost all gone. Anybody know where they went?
Oh, I don't know where they went, but I know that like Europeans like killed them like a lot, like recent cases of wolves.
Oh yes, but why did we kill them is the bottom line.
For the pelts, the fur.
No. The majority of our die-off was not for fur.
Was it to,
No.
so they wouldn't eat the grass for the health you get?
No, in some cases you could imagine that competition, but all things considered, these are really good cows. So sure, some people ate them, and maybe there was some rancher, but before this happened, during the westward expansion, when we were manifesting all that destiny, we had a government-run program to intentionally make these extinct. Anybody know why?
They're big and scary.
They had people like stampedes.
So beautiful.
Anybody else? These are all great ideas. I love your thinking here. Students,
No, whoa. What?
we exterminated them so we could starve the Indians.
No way. What? Wow. Go white man.
Now, like I said earlier, there were probably all sorts of reasons to shoot them. Some people wanted to eat them, and I'm sure someone made a really nice jacket. And I'm sure that they may have been a really mean buffalo that was scaring your kindergartners and stuff. But the national extermination of the buffalo was the first act that I'm aware of an intentional extinction as an act of warfare. Yes?
When was that?
Oh, like when the railroads were trying to come out, and like kind of in the Wild West, like early westward expansion. I'm not really clear about the railroad timing fitting in, but like when we had like soldiers fighting Indians, and we had the postal service getting established, and like the Dances with Wolves period, if you saw that Costner movie, it's actually like dead center right in that sweet spot. They would pay hunters to sit on trains with open doors. And there would be a spotter looking forward, and he'd say, oh, we're about to come into them. And then as the train would come through like a herd of buffalo, they would just shoot them from a moving train, see how many they could get. People would just sell the skulls to show that they had shot one, but they wouldn't bring back the rest. Yeah?
Wasn't there an intentional extermination of like birds, that, like a certain kind of bird and like rat in Germany after the Holocaust?
Oh, I don't know, man.
Like there was like it was intentional, and it was like kind of like a scapegoat, like they were blaming like the animals, and then they just like killed a ton of these birds, and like and they offered like a reward, and like it was like birds, rats, something else, like in some kind of insect, and they had all three of the species went extinct.
Huh. I'd love to hear more about this, because intentional extinction is kind of an exception to the rule, and so that sounds curious, and I'd love to know more about that.
Why are there like thousands of them on the
Because they use that as a movie set, and so to replicate the American Midwest, they were brought to Catalina to be part of a movie set. You know, Catalina's close to Los Angeles, to Hollywood.
Yeah.
And so they filmed a movie there, and at the end of the movie, they're like, well, whatever, we'll just leave them. And they escaped, and they've run amok on that whole island. And you know, the funny thing is that those are not actually buffalo, they're called beefalo. Because almost all American bison populations today have interbred with domestic cattle at some point. So, in the most ironic fluke of nature, probably the most genetically pure American bison live behind a chain link fence in Golden Gate Park in the middle of San Francisco. Yeah.
Did they ever try to like repopulate that?
Yeah. People have tried a lot. The downer is where we've successfully repopulated with bison, we now realize that they are beefalo, not buffalo. And that makes them more susceptible to certain diseases and not as hardy to the cold. The hybrids aren't as well suited for their environment. So we are now repopulating with like a B-rate half-breed bison. Yeah.
What was the effect of those beefalo on Catalina? Did they thrive and destroy habitat, or did they just ride it?
As far as I can tell, they're delicious, and people on Catalina, I've never heard of them.
They have a lot of buffalo meats.
Yeah, I mean, you can pay ranchers out there to go and shoot a buffalo on their land, and then you get your own big-ass bison to take home.
Why would you want to take it?
Yeah, dodgy. Okay, so grassland is all used up because we like it for farms. Its value as farmland is undebatable. And now look, we're going to the tropics. And I want to remind you, please look up. We have extreme seasonality, moderate seasonality, and very little or no seasonality in the tropics. Newsflash. There's different reasons to get seasons. You guys know that the ocean is moving, right? That water moves, currents. The reason I mentioned that is, remember, the tropics has very little seasonality in terms of rainfall and sun exposure. But the tropics can have seasonality because of the effect of currents. You understand what I mean by that? Even if there isn't a big difference in sunlight and day length here, the water delivered from up there is going to be really different. Or the water coming from here will be different each season. So meteorologically, there's very little or no seasons, but you can still get oceanographic seasonality. because of currents that have a seasonal influence elsewhere in the world. Does that make sense to everybody? They bring a little bit of winter during the winter. Tropical rainforest is the darkest green, and you'll notice it's perfectly limited by 30 degrees south and 30 degrees north. The biggest chunk is, of course, the Brazilian Amazon, which coincidentally, we talk a lot about the Brazilian Amazon, but Venezuela has probably more awesome Amazonian forests than Brazil. Ditto Ecuador and Peru. On the backside of the Andes, they tend to have a really nice highland Amazonian forest. There's also a lot over here, centered along the Congo River, and a whole lot over here in the Asian Pacific Islands. And you all know what to look for because you've seen this before. The conditions here are sunny, they're wet, and they're always the same. If you had to design a perfect environment for plant growth, you couldn't make it any better than the tropical rainforest. It is obviously the perfect combination of what most plants look for.
It has the least nutrients in the soil.
Because there's nothing left to fight over. They get all the water they're ever going to need, so water's not a limiting factor. Like, you don't have to water a plant in the rainforest. It's already got all the water it needs. They have all the light they can possibly handle. Every day is exactly 12 hours of sunlight, so they're fine. You can't really get it any warmer. Average daytime temperature is in the 80s or the 90s. So the only thing left is nutrients. Structurally, they're competing for light, and internally, they're fighting for nutrients. Look at the bottom sentence up there. With all that growth, nutrients live in the biomass of the plants, not in the soil. Imagine dropping a quarter on Skid Row. That quarter is going to get picked up right away, right? Well, when you drop nutrients in the rainforest, every plant has all the water they need. It's warm, it's sunny, it's the right season. They're all ready to go. Just give them the nutrients. So literally, decomposition is faster here. It's more total in this environment. And there's never anything left in the ground. By the way, if there was nutrients left in the ground, the daily flood of rainfall would wash it away too. So any random nutrient that escapes a plant will end up in the river that afternoon. No nutrients in the soil. There are less nutrients in this dirt than there are in any desert. In a desert, you can imagine a world where a horse decomposed and there was nothing there to use up those nutrients, so they just soak into the ground. In the rainforest, if a beetle falls to the ground, it'll be a tree tomorrow. The decomposition is faster, it's more total, and the plants are all waiting for the nutrients. Yeah. That one fly has been in my classroom since Saturday.
What is he?
I don't know, he seems to like the girls, so that's great. I'm not complaining.
Yeah, I was wondering, like,
Either that or he's like the 15,000th fly that's been here since Saturday.
what does decomposition look like if you were to fast forward? Like, does the beetle just kind of dissolve because the bacteria is eating it?
Yeah, I mean, you can imagine the conditions are super consistent. So you have every possible specialized variety all waiting. They're just waiting for the food. So if it requires a specialized bacteria to break down the shell of a beetle, if it lives anywhere, it'll live there. And if it requires a specialized worm to bury the leg of the beetle so that it'll decompose on the ground in the special presence of some weird amoeba that lives in a little pocket of water, this is the place where you'll find it. remember that with all those resources in one place, all that sunlight, all that warmth, all that water, and it always being the same, you can specialize on whatever you want, and you'll have it tomorrow as well. The consistency allows you to divide niches into trillions of little miniature niches, super specialized to the point of absurdity. Specialized plants, specialized insects. I'll give you an example. There's a fig called the strangler fig. Birds eat the fruit, and then the birds will crap out the fruit on top of a tree somewhere. When it rains, that poop gets washed into the crotch of a branch against the trunk. And the seeds are kind of spiny, so when they get into bark, they stick. They're like Velcro for bark. The seed will sprout because it's going to rain tomorrow. When that seed sprouts, it has a little bit of stored up energy, but it doesn't make leaves. It just makes a root. And the root just, gravity and rainfall, make it go down, 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 around the trunk of the tree until it touches dirt. And as soon as it touches dirt, the root will sprout hairs along the edges, and they'll start to dig into the wood. This brings nutrients and water up to the plant, which up at the top now will grow leaves, now does photosynthesis, now gets a lot of momentum and makes a whole bunch more roots. That gravity will just wrap around the tree, and as they touch, they start to grow hairs into the trunk, and they start to expand. Over the course of a couple of years, those roots will overlap each other and build like a mesh of roots, and then they fill in. So the strangler fig builds like a cylinder of wood with all the leaves on top of the tree, where the light is, right? Now that it's built a cylinder, whenever it drinks, it expands and starts to choke the tree on the inside until it kills the tree it landed on. Imagine what you've got in 2 years. You have a cylindrical tree with leaves in the canopy and a plug of fertilizer all to itself. Except that's just the beginning, because since that's a resource, someone has specialized on that. So there are parasitic bromeliads and orchids that only grow on strangler figs because they know if they can drill through the fig, they'll find a bunch of compost on the inside of the tree. So there are parasites that live on the parasitic strangler fig. Look at the richness. Like, look at the volume of green on green on green. Did anybody notice the fake monkey that's computer graphics spliced onto the tree?
Yeah.
Right, Thar? You like a little monkey. What are you doing out there? Now remember that with all that water flowing, it doesn't really leave you an opportunity for nutrients to settle very deeply into the soil before they get leached by rainfall. You know, you're like hosing off the driveway every single day. You'll have a pretty clean driveway. So a lot of the nutrients, if they dissolve in water, will be found in the rivers. And tropical rainforests have very unique rivers. Very, very interesting rivers. These are nutrient-rich rivers. Unlike our Sierras that have crystal clear blue rivers, this part of the world has dense, rich, lively, productive rivers. Because there's a lot of biomass to feed the rivers, they are very lively. Big old fish. All the biggest freshwater fish live in tropical rivers because they're the only rivers that can support enough food web to have giant predator fish in a river. You know, you go to the Sierras, and it's like, oh my God, I got a huge one! But you go to the Amazon, and you can find an arapaima that's like from me to Harrison. that'll be like that big
Ooh, I hate that.
and like that thick in this section.
What animals?
You can go to rainforest in Thailand and find catfish that would be at my feet with their tail behind Mary, and they get like big. Like if you're going to land on top, you better get ready to sit like on a horse, like big. Because these are special rivers too. All that productivity goes somewhere. It's not like all the life ends on land and then these are little clear sterile blue rivers. I've eaten some spectacular big fish out of the Amazon. OMG.
It's really murky that way.
Yeah, in most places. Yeah. I ate a pacu that was like that big around and like that thick. I ate arapaima that was not as big as Nita Harrison, but it was big. They had like a duck bill. I ate red-tailed catfish like this. Or what?
They're just real animals?
No, it's make-believe. I'm lying. Yes? You have a smartphone. I got to get going. Look, there are names for these different layers, but they're all in English. So you can write it down if you want. I don't mind. And I'm going to try to put the slideshow on the internet so y'all have access to it. But just so you know, if you wanted to write these down, you can. I think most of them you could decipher because it's English. Like subterranean means underground, and emergent means it emerges. The canopy is like a canopy, so you. Understory is like the lower story of the canopy. So I don't know. You could probably just.
Shrubs.
Yeah, the shrub layer. I wonder if that's shrubby at all. I wonder where the forest floor layer is. So you can definitely just decipher these in English, but I'll try to post the PowerPoint if you want this later. Specialized frogs, specialized birds, specialized spiders. Everything is specialized here. Now, one thing that I need to remind you of is that this part of the world has plenty of laws that protect it. When we Americans freak out, did you find arapaima? Right. When we Americans freak out about illegal logging in the rainforest or illegal hunting in the rainforest, we always start screaming, somebody should just pass a law. But you got to remember, we live in a place where laws make kind of a lot of difference. Here's the news flash that I think might surprise a lot of you. The tropical rainforests have hundreds of regional, national, and international laws that protect them. So what's the problem with all this illegal activity? Who the hell's going to enforce those laws? These are poor countries. Look where I pointed. Venezuela, Ecuador, Bolivia, Peru, Brazil, the Congo, Indonesia. I mean, they can't enforce like airport security. They can't keep their political figures from being assassinated left and right. They have like massive starvation in big cities. I mean, they've got like one cop for the whole Amazon, and he's carrying like a keychain and a dorky hat. And he's going to go take on like an armed gang of illegal loggers 1,000 miles from cell reception. Get in a fist fight. The thing you have to remember is there's no shortage of legal protections in this part of the world. There's just a limit to enforcement in this part of the world. Because this is like real wilderness. This is remote. This isn't like jump out of a helicopter and be the hero that saves the day. This is like take your cousin's moped because you don't get one from work and go until the road runs out and then charge through the forest for 600 miles and then try to enforce those laws. The seasonal forest is sort of a make-believe biome. I told you that there's a couple of in-between ones that your book lists that I'm not really sure are major. This is one of them. This is the part where it's kind of wet but kind of dry. It's like the edge of the tropical rainforest. So instead of being rainy all the time, here there's a dry season and a wet season. If you could please look up between the tropical rainforest in dark green and the tropical savanna in salmon pink color. Between the salmon pink and the rainforest, you get this stuff, which is like a little grassier than rainforest, but a little woodier than savanna. In between. Most of us consider that an ecotone. It's the space between two biomes. But some people like to call it a separate biome of its own. You've got like the Mediterranean sort of wet, dry seasons, but this is more tropical, and when it's rainy, it's really tropical rainy. So it's a lot like our Mediterranean, a dry spell and a wet spell, but when it's a wet spell, it's like a gnarly wet spell. There's really not much else to say about it. It's in between savanna and rainforest. If we've made an impact here, it's primarily ranching and farming. If we could deliver water, you know, half grassland, half rainforest, if we could deliver water, then you'd have the conditions for plant growth that are ideal plus free water. This would be the best ranch land anywhere. And so in many parts of the world, they're building dams in the tropics to irrigate this. This is like the future of food production for much of the third world. Yeah?
Wait, what is this 30% remains intact and 70% is...
Yeah, right. We've already been ranching it, at least seasonally. So a lot of these places during the wet season, we let the cattle roam, or especially goats.
Oh, so it just means 30% is wild and free and we have to touch it?
Right. That's
Oh,
what
I
exactly.
thought like we destroyed like 70% of the
Well, do the math. If 30% is intact, 70% is not.
But what is like not intact?
But not intact is a broad spectrum. Some cases, just a little ranching here and there. Some cases, there's like human developments there. There's cities there and stuff. Okay. The one that will bridge us into tomorrow is the tropical savanna. The savanna is probably what you guys think of like a safari. When people go to Africa to go on a safari, that's savanna. Savanna is the pinkish, salmonish color. You know, we can actually finish this one today. I'm going to go for it. Pink is the salmon color. So most of sub-Saharan Africa, except the rainy part, so sub-Saharan Africa there, the Pantanal of Brazil. There's a little bit in like Guyana, French Guiana, a little bit in Australia, and almost all of India is this type of climate. Savanna is like grassland for the tropics. So instead of having like Kansas, where there will be like some rain in the spring and some rain in the summer and some rain in the fall, here they have either one or two major rain chunks. Imagine, arid grassland part of the year, tropical rainforest with non-stop rain the rest of the year. Monsoon season, have you guys heard of the monsoon? Monsoons hit here. That model of growing when it's wet and then decaying when it's dry is most extreme here. Remember, it's tropical, so it's just like grassland, but much more extreme. Super productive. This is where all those zebras and wildebeest and lions and hyenas live. I don't have a lot of good pictures. When I made this slideshow, I couldn't find very good ones. There are a couple of species that I want to tell you about, some interesting trivia. One of them is, of course, the elephant, which is an extremely famous species. You guys know that the illegal trade in ivory is the most valuable black market animal trade? Yeah. or at least it was until recently. Tuna might be more valuable black market trade now.
Black market tuna.
Yeah.
Why?
Well, because most tuna are black market.
Is tuna like illegal?
The tuna we eat.
Most of what you eat is outside of international controls. So I guess you call it a gray market. I mean, it's sold above the table, but it hasn't been.
It's like bad tuna.
Right, it's just not regulated, so it's contributing to overfishing. So I'm sure you guys have heard that those elephant tusks, those modified teeth, make for really nice trinkets and keyboards on pianos. And so the elephant has been almost entirely exterminated from natural range by hunting.
You have to kill it to get the tusk.
You have to kill them to get the tusk. When they're alive, you can take a portion of the tusk. But if you kill them, you can get the whole thing.
Yeah, they don't grow back up.
They do not grow back, especially if they're dead. The interesting thing is, and this is an important story that you really need to hear, so I'm going to try to rush through this. The trade in elephants is illegal. Ivory is regulated now by international convention. If you are found to have an ivory item, you got to prove it was older than like 60 years old, or you're in like serious deep doo-doo. And for a long time, poaching rates were going down and elephant populations in nature were coming up until a few years ago. And watch this cascade of events. Climate change has changed the amount of evaporation in the North Atlantic. So for the last 5 or 10 years, most of Europe has gotten less rain than usual. That rain is carried by the jet stream to Russia, which is the world's largest exporter of grains. Now that Russia doesn't have a lot of rainfall, they don't have extra wheat to sell. So Russians aren't starving, they're just not selling extra wheat. And you guys know who is the largest buyer of wheat on Earth? Let me finish this. No, we're a big enough grower, but the continent of Africa, with the least food production land on Earth, they buy whatever they can get on the market. Now listen, climate change, less wheat means less food for Africa, means more hungry Africans got to find a way to make money and buy more expensive food at the market. So the amount of elephant poaching has spiked in the last couple of years because of declining food security in Africa. And the elephants are back on a downward slide.